welcome students in my class English with Rita ma'am. Today we will read the next chapter, that is chapter 10, and this is the part 2 of the story Great Stone Face. So first let me tell you about the setting of the story as you have known about the story. You have already read. Let me tell you about the setting. The story is set in a valley. The main character of the story is Ernest, a young man, young boy. Supporting character of the story is his mother, a loving woman, Gather Gold, as I have also written earlier in the previous video. Mr. Gather Gold, wealthy merchant, Old Blood and Thunder, another native of the valley. He is a great general, and that's why he is known as Blood and Thunder. He thunders like the clouds in the battlefield. The other characters are a statesman and the poet. Okay? Later we will discuss about the conclusion. First, I want to revise the story, the previous story, Great Stone Face Part 1. Okay? As you have already read about the story. Yes. You already know what is Great Stone Face. The Great Stone Face was a work of nature formed on the perpendicular side of the mountain by some immense rock. You can see the picture. I have the picture also. It is in a picture form. The previous story, part 1, is in the picture form. He talked about the Great Stone Face with his mother, and he wished to see that man whose face resembles with the face of the Great Stone Face. See, the second, when he is talking, the boy is talking with his mother and hoping to see the man whose face may resembles with the face of the Great Stone Face. He also wished to live for such long time so that he could see his face. Next, you can see at some future day, child should be born. This was told, this prophecy, this was the prophecy. His mother told about the prophecy when he asked. She says, if the prophecy comes true. The boy asked about the prophecy, and his mother told about the prophecy that one day a man would. His mother told him that one day a man would born and to this valley whose face may resemble to the face of the Great Stone Face. The boy became very happy and he wished to live for such time so that he could see. Next picture, you can see the boy was spending his days in the valley helping his mother. He was very kind, very quiet, very mild, and he became young. He spent his days in helping his mother. He was a very kind child. And you can see also the picture at last, the two people whom have been described in the previous video, Mr. Gather Gold and the Old Blood and Thunder. The one of that man, it was the people just just started talking that he was coming, and the people were gathering to the spot where they were to celebrate his arrival. So this is about the story, the previous story. Now you may have idea about the previous story. Now come to the part 2. The boy Ernest, he became young, and years hurried on. Here the white hair came on his head. Wrinkles also came across his forehead and furrows in his cheeks. But not in vain had he grown old. Not in vain he had grown old means he grew with all the wisdoms. More numerous than the white hairs on his head were the wise thoughts in his mind. He became very wise. He has more wise thoughts, more than the perhaps hair grown on his head, which became white. And Ernest had ceased to be obscure, unsought, for undesired. He had come the fame which so many seek. He had become famous beyond the limits of the valley. Beyond the limits of the valley means the people who lived far and wide, they came to know about the wisdom of Ernest. He became very wise. So the people started approaching to him, coming to him, seeking advice and seeking some thoughts. Professors and even the active men of the cities came from far to see and converse with Ernest. They were very much eager to converse with Ernest as he became very wise. He was a wise personality. He received them with gentle sincerity. So gentle he was, so simple he was. He received all the people who came to him to converse with him. He received all of them with all his sincerity, gentle sincerity, and spoke to them freely of whatever came uppermost or lay deepest in their hurt or his own. And when they talked, his face would brighten, unaware, and shine upon them as with a mild evening light, just like he sat and gazed the great stone face, and it was beaming over the people of the valley, over the Ernest also. So he was quite unaware. Ernest was quite unaware of this fact that when he talked with the people in evening sitting in the valley, his face also would brighten. It was shining. He was quite unaware that his face was shining while talking to them. While Ernest had been growing old, God had granted a new poet to the earth, the valley, the world, you can say, not the valley, but the world, to this earth. He too was from the valley. That poet was also the native of the valley. I have written on the character already, the poet. In earlier video I had not written, but I have told you the other characters were also statesman and the poet. So this poet, the God had granted, means a poet was born to the valley. He belonged to the valley, but he had spent the greater part of his life in distant cities. He also left the valley like Gathergold and Old Blood and Thunder, and spent his life in the city, pouring out his sweet music everywhere. He was a very great poet, and he poured out his poetry to the people. He wrote many great poems. Neither was the great stone face forgotten, for the great poet had celebrated it in poems. As he belonged to the valley, he was also the people of the man who was living in the valley, so he had not forgotten about the great stone face. He had described the great stone face in his poetries. He had celebrated the great stone face in his poems, which found their way to Ernest. Means his poems reached Ernest also read about his poems, and when he read the poems written by that poet and he lifted his eyes to see the great stone face, it seemed he was trying to find out some similarity or some resemblance between the man described in the poem and the great stone face. He read them after his customary toil, the daily work. Every day, as you have already read in the first part, that every evening after the finishing his everyday toil, he sat and gazed upon the great stone face. So, in the second part also, he read the poetries written by that great poet after his customary toil, seated on the bench before his cottage door. As he read, he lifted his eyes and said, "O great stone face, is not this man worthy to be your likeness?" Is this not man? Means the man that is described in the poem. So you may see this also that I have just told you. I have the picture. Again and again, Ernest examined the poet's feature, which was described in the poem. Poet's feature means poet's personality, his feature. He turned towards the great stone face, then back. Finally, he shook his head and sighed. The poet, when finally decided to come to the valley, he also came and he had a talk with the poet. The poet talked to him. "Why are you sad?" Ernest told him, "Because all through life I have awaited the fulfillment of a prophecy. And when I read your poems, I had that it might be fulfilled in you." Prophecy, I have written here, prophecy. Yes, the statement that tells what will happen in future. So he was very sad. Ernest was sad that the prophecy about which he had heard, he was awaiting for the fulfillment of the prophecy, but it didn't come true, and so he was very sad. The poet told, "You hope to find in me the likeness of the great stone face. I am not worthy to be its likeness." Actually, Ernest was trying to find the likeness of the great stone face in the face of the poet. You can see, they are talking, the poet and Ernest. Ernest told, "Why not? Are not those thoughts in your poetry worthy? I can hear in them the distant voice of a heavenly song." He told, "Why not? Why your face can't resemble the face of the great stone face?" Because the thoughts that the poet had described in the poetries has quite heavenly thoughts, heavenly song he had written. That's why he told him that his face may resemble. The poet says, "But my life, dear Ernest, has not corresponded with my thoughts. I have had grand dreams, but they have been only dreams. Sometimes I lack faith in my own thoughts." The poet told that whatever he had written in the poem didn't resemble with his thoughts. Whatever he had written, the thoughts in the poetries could not match with the thought of the poets. It was only the dream. "Why then, pure seeker of the good and true, should you hope to find me in the face of the mountain?" He said, "You are the pure seeker of good and true." Good. So he said his face did not resemble with the face. Ernest told, poet spoke sadly and his eyes were wet with tears. Here there is sentimental that I have told in the previous video, that there is some quite sentimental touch in the story. His eyes filled with the tears and he said, "No, alas, my face would resemble with the face of the great stone face." At the hour of sunset, as had long been his custom, Ernest was to speak to a group of neighbors in the open air. It was a custom. He was spending his life from boyhood to young man, and then he became old, and now it had become the customary every day. He, after finishing his work, he just went to the field, and there the people gathered. Some more people came also, the professors, the city people, and the other people to converse with him. So usually he sat there and spoke to the people, he conversed with the people, shared his thought to the peoples. So at the evening he went to that spot with the poet to share his thoughts. Ernest threw a look of familiar kindness around upon his audience. Ernest threw a look of the familiar kindness. He saw the people who were sitting. See, Ernest was sitting, along with him the poet was also there, and some people were there to listen Ernest. He was talking to the people, and he began to speak what was in his heart and mind. Every day it was his habit. He spoke to the people whatever was in his heart and mind. And when he was speaking, the poet saw Ernest, and then he saw the great stone face. Again he saw Ernest, and again he saw the great stone face. And suddenly there was cloud in the sky, and he realized that the face of Ernest was exactly looking like the face of the great stone face. But the cloud was clustering from there. You can see he was speaking, and finally the poet came to the conclusion that actually Ernest was that man whom the people were awaiting to be born in the valley. And as it was a prophecy his mother had told. And see the conclusion. The boy Ernest could not find the man whose face may have the resemblance with the great stone face. One day a poet arrived. You have been already described that the poet, who was also the native of the valley, after spending much part of his life in the cities, he came to the valley. He arrived in the valley, and when Ernest was sharing his thoughts with the valley people at the end of the day, there was cloud in the sky, and when from the distance the poet saw Ernest speaking to the people, he realized that Ernest's face was exactly looking like the great stone face. He proclaimed that you are the person whom you are looking for such a long time. And this is the conclusion of the story. In this way, the second part of the story finished. Then all the people looked when the poet proclaimed that his face is resembling with the face of great stone face. Then all the people who were there listening Ernest, they all looked and saw that what the poet said was true. The prophecy was fulfilled, but Ernest, having finished what he had to say, took the poet's arm and walked slowly homeward. So gentle he was, he had no feelings that his face, he was the great man, his face resembles the face of the great stone face. He gently took poet's arm and walked slowly homeward, still hoping that some wiser and better man than himself would by and by appear, bearing a resemblance to the great stone face. This is the end of the story and the conclusion of the story. The story ends. Thank you.